Hello, and welcome back to another episode of International Immersion, a podcast where we seek to connect people, cultures, places, and present an environment where people can learn and develop from shared experiences and the knowledge that makes up this great world of ours. So for today's episode, I have my father back, and we are carrying on with our discussions from our previous episodes where he discussed what it was like to do business overseas, and then how he developed personal relationships and what those led him to do, what doors they opened for him. So today, carrying on with that, we're going to go into some more of the extreme examples and situations or situations that he got himself into that people who do business overseas may encounter, particularly in Asia. So for our audience today, I want to know that while the topics today are not bad, they may be a little more extreme, and I would just advise that some things may be a little offensive, but it's just the reality of the situation that my father experienced while he was over there in not just one country, but many countries. So we just want to kind of give an honest depiction of what he experienced and kind of an image of what things were like, 20, 25 years ago in that part of the world. So Dad, it's great to have you back today, and hope things have been good for you.
Yeah, I appreciate being back.
So perfect. Yeah, so we've already discussed, in 2 episodes, kind of what it was like in the business environment and then more building personal relationships from those business experiences. So today, as you so kindly have offered, you want to discuss some of the more extreme elements of what you encountered while doing business overseas.
Yeah, I think that just a little bit of clarification on, the use of the word extreme. I would say that there's a phrase that's, common in Western culture as well, which is work hard, play hard. So by comparison, that same English phrase has applicability, from, doing business and traveling on business in the Pacific Rim, specifically China, Taiwan, some of the places we've talked about before. So when we talk about, we've talked about working hard, well, we've kind of addressed some of that and how that can lead to personal relationships and kind of a deepening of cultural perspectives, etc. But the play hard part of it is very much part of their culture. I guess if I would make a comparison to, business in the United States as an example, or Western countries, has to do with, quote, gifts or, people that want to sell or get you goods or services are going to employ similar tactics within, the legal realm, of course, and possibly in some cases illegal. But the point is that the same type of networking interaction happens in the Far East, but unique to their culture. I think another good example is that when people in China, as an example, and my Taiwanese people that I developed relationships with, they want you're a guest, okay? They know you don't live there, so you're a guest. So they want you to have an enjoyable experience. And part of that enjoyable experience, crosses over into, I guess, what we would call here in the West, partying while you're over there. So yes, you work hard, but in the evenings there are dinners. We've talked about the KYT and the KYT. We talk about the KTVs and the MTVs and the different kind of parties that go on there. But there are also more business-related parties that involve the people that were part of the companies that I worked for, either partners or actual employees, and then their suppliers. Because in the footwear business, you don't just have the factory people, you've got the material people, you've got the various synthetics that were used to make outsoles like polyurethane or PVC, polyvinyl chloride, all these different things. So you've got a multitude of suppliers. So especially excursions into China, there was always the invitation from not only the factory people, that our liaisons had the business relationships with. But there was also suppliers. A couple of people in particular, because we had regular suppliers at one point in my footwear career over there, that you would develop relationships because you partied with them, and usually surrounded like what we would call here a club. But a club in the Orient, the way I understand it, is not a club here in the United States. A club here in the United States is, you would go there, they'd have a bottle of booze or something on the table, and then you have, you got a bunch of friends, and there's dancing and music and things like that. A club, as I experienced it in the Orient, was a karaoke bar or karaoke house. And a lot of these places were quite elaborate. And even though I didn't speak very well at all or read, let alone read, you could see these places, especially at night. And I would always ask, my friends, my business partners, in the beginning, especially, say, hey, that looks like a pretty cool place. I say, oh yeah, that's a quote dirty massage, or that's a club in quotation marks. So over time, you just kind of recognize it without necessarily having to read Mandarin or Chinese. So
you're saying that you basically, like, the more you spent time with them, the more time you spent with certain characters and business partners, the more you got to understand just by your own personal experience and what you learn from them. You learn, I can kind of tell what kind of place this is from looking at it, and very, very simply, like, just going in, it's very obvious to what type of establishment it could be.
Very much so, very much so. And in the early days, it started off with the dinners and the drinking, primarily alcohol. There, in my experience, there was never really a illegal drug kind of situation existing at that time in the Far East. Taiwan had a little disclosure on the immigration form that if you took in illegal drugs, you would face the death penalty. That's actually on, or was on, the immigration form when I was traveling there regularly.
That would be a bit of a deterrent for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that it started off, and usually it's a pretty, kind of scripted out thing. It's dinner, drinking, and then the opportunity to go to one of these clubs, these karaoke clubs. But the main difference is these karaoke clubs, their employees, besides people who bring you, snacks and more alcohol in this case, you can imagine that as the night would wear on, more and more alcohol will be consumed, and that lends itself to a very quote free environment. But the main employees of these clubs were young Oriental women, and they were kind of like a companion. They would sing songs with you. It was almost like having someone to serve you. You'll get a kick out of it, because one of the things that in the very limited Chinese that I learned was, Sao Jie Bing Kuai. Sao Jie Bing Kuai Ma. Like,
ice cubes. Yeah.
Put the ice in the beer, So it was like, because a lot of times it wasn't cold, and Westerners are used to cold beer.
Very true, very true.
There was also Gaoliang, and they really liked scotch and whiskey. And it could get pretty crazy, carrying people out of there and things like that. But I think that the underlying business aspect of it goes back to this work hard, play hard, and this idea that you are a honored guest. And the honored guest, from what I understand of an Oriental perspective, is they want you to be comfortable, happy, and have a good time. Because underlying that is this idea that now you're creating an even potentially deeper business relationship, because of the things we've talked about before, which are more personal. This is much more of a personal thing. Being involved in those things for the years that I have, it got pretty personal. And you kind of knew, what certain people's behaviors were going to be, or what questions they would ask you the next day. Hey, I've got this, we got to negotiate about this type of thing. So there's definitely a leverage aspect to that as well. They want you to feel comfortable and have a good time because there are very much agendas, just like there would be in any business situation that has that element to it, which is a lot. There's a lot of that play hard, work hard, play hard type of dichotomy, that goes on. So, but getting back to the clubs, that's what a club was. So my experience wasn't so much, let's go to a museum in that particular situation. Let's go to Sun Moon Lake in Taiwan. We did that. And I think that what people would normally consider, in quotations, a normal type of interaction with someone from a different culture, that's what you would expect. But my experience with business, especially if you actually were there with some of your own customers and going through this similar process, it was a dimension that kind of lends itself to, perhaps, at least in my experience, because I was a businessman as opposed to a businesswoman. It lended itself to a much more, I guess, for lack of a better term, a more misogynistic experience of what that culture represented. Now, I'm not a historian like you are, but I do enjoy history, and back into, Asian history in that respect, I would suspect that this type of thing was around in some form or another from their unique, applied, or their unique applicability of it. But that's pretty much what it was: the dinner, the drinking, and the club.
Kind of in that order. Those were kind of the three primary
That's
activities.
pretty much what the evening was. At least that was my experience, when it came to having a good time with your business partners, whether it was a supplier, a factory person, or whatever it was. This was what was done. As the last trip I made there in the mid 2000s, same situation pretty much was intact.
So I could say, so the entire period of time that you were traveling there, from the late 1980s through the mid 2000s, it was pretty much the same. I mean, granted, things changed from place to place, more development, in different countries, growth, economic development, whatever you want to call it. But you could say these types of situations or scenarios played out relatively the same throughout that whole period.
There wasn't a lot of deviation. Korea, the times that I went there, it was the kissing party. And then, as I mentioned, in Taiwan and China, it was, the KTV, or the karaoke parties. Now, I think that, to be completely transparent and honest about that, there is an element, of the kind of dinner club environment type thing that lends itself, to perhaps more of what's the best way to describe it without being overly crass. I think that it lends itself to an environment where the businessmen can take advantage of certain other services associated within those clubs. Now, this is obviously sensitive, and potentially, offensive, type of thing for some people who may listen to this. And it may not be the experience of some people that have gone over there. It just may not. It just was mine. So I think that it's important that that we be honest, about how that was potentially seen by other people besides me.
For sure. And, everyone has a different perspective and a different point of view. And like you said, depending on what reasons you're going overseas or what industry you're in, that's going to lend itself to different experiences. Like, whereas I went overseas for education, that's quite different from business. I definitely can relate in many ways to certain things, that you've mentioned in this episode and the previous ones, but it's still not the exact same situation because I was not there for the sole purpose of doing business when I was in the Far East.
Yeah. And that's an important differentiation because the avenues open to you were probably more diverse than they were for me at that particular time because I was there for a singular purpose. Developing footwear product that would eventually be sold in the United States, as one example. But this is also kind of, as you may have seen on some of these investigative reports type things, different documentaries having to do with this. It's definitely kind of an underbelly, of the process itself. I think on the last podcast we talked about the illegal gambling story.
Yes, very memorable.
Yeah, this one, it kind of is an extension of that, depending on how deep you could go into that part of the experience, had a lot to do with who you knew or who you developed a relationship with. So again, being completely honest and transparent, it is not an expectation, but an opportunity. If someone wanted to take advantage of it, they could. And let's not beat around the bush. It has to do with prostitution.
No, and exactly, you hit it right. You hit the nail right on the head. It comes down to who you know and who they know and the connections, or whatever you want to describe it. Yes. So,
yeah.
And that will lead you further and further and further, and open more and more doors, both potentially, legal or even illegal.
Correct. Correct. And, this is kind of a quote hidden aspect, of that, play hard type of part of the dichotomy between work hard and play hard. But it's also something, that is, for the most part, under the surface. It's like one of those things that people know about, but they don't talk about it, and they don't make a big deal out of it. We talked about, I think, in some of the earlier podcasts about face.
Yes.
You maintain faith, you maintain that integrity, and to a certain extent, you keep some of those elements to yourself, which I'm not doing here. I don't travel over there anymore. That is not meant, for a general public consumption, although everyone knows about it. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. It's one of those situations where it's like it can be general knowledge, but it's not generally talked about. Yeah,
not only generally talked about and not open for display. A lot of those deeper aspects of that, that club environment. It's, I guess, best way to describe it would be, that they are below the surface, and the opportunity there is to take advantage of it. And I think that there were a lot of people who did. Obviously not going to name any names in particular, but there are a lot of people did. They got an opportunity to be able to, to have line of sight into that process. So I think it's important to understand, that this is not on public display. This is not on public display, even though it kind of is. It's that weird kind of opposite type of thing. But it's also, that face element of Asian culture where, yes, that exists, just like it, would exist in, say, a place like Las Vegas here in the United States. But it's also about, discretion, which doesn't necessarily make it, quote, right, from the standpoint of, say, moral turpitude, but it is something that is there and is a part of the business experience from, a very surface, quote, what we would say generally an innocent type of thing where you're just enjoying, a female or male counterpart, in a club situation, to something more than that. So there is an element, of secrecy, I guess you would say, but it's secrecy on a level that if it's not flaunted, then it's not necessarily considered to be something that would be inappropriate to do from the standpoint, everyone, from the partners to the factory people to the, to the suppliers, etc. So it's kind of like a network in and of itself. And we know, how pervasive the idea of networking is from an Asian perspective and their own unique applicability of that. So yeah, but I think it's also important to address in this situation that, a lot of what that play hard experience represents, there's also some significant social and global issues having to do from everything from exploitation to human trafficking to all the things that may contribute to that situation. They may or may not, because the question in my mind, or if I was an outsider listening into this conversation, I would ask, wow, I mean, that seems like you're taking advantage, of a situation, where there's potential poverty, these young women being in a situation where they have no choice, or they're kind of in that for nefarious reasons of a variety of different, types. But yes, I think you have to address that openly and honestly. Is yes, that those things could be a part of that. And it's kind of one of the unfortunate aspects that surround things like that. That I think that you just have to be honest with, and that people potentially, to the point of, international immersion from this perspective, people will be potentially exposed to that. So it comes down to, kind of making decisions that align with the person in the way that they kind of are. And again, it's no secret that a lot of people took advantage, of that play hard kind of environment. Let's just be honest about it.
No, and it comes down, just to how people are, and just what their makeup is. Yeah, some people, they have different levels, I think, of moral integrity, and in some circumstances they just don't care. They want to take advantage of things. You've mentioned some examples of that from people you experienced that were, I would say, a little shocking, or blatant they could be, or there were some who they did, but no one would ever know, and they're just very secretive about it. But it just comes down to how people operate.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, by talking about it here, kind of exposing it in a way that maybe. And
I think it's not even
have done.
I wouldn't even say that. I would say I think people generally know that this stuff happens, around the world. And in any case, it's just that this is more of a specific example of it.
Yeah.
Not with any of us, but just with what you, in your case, what you've experienced.
Exactly. And it's important in terms of folks that may go over there now, to whatever extent that still exists, need to understand that they will potentially be exposed to. They may not, but they may be. Or they would have an opportunity maybe that wouldn't necessarily present itself in that way in different countries, or especially in the West, even though I'm sure that there's still an element of that. The whole idea of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
I think at the end of the day, if people want something, there will be a service, or there will be a way they can get it, regardless of what it is. I mean, supply and demand. So
that's correct.
Whenever there's a demand, someone will be there to ensure that demand is met.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. So if you look at it, completely separated from any social or legal or whatever, or global kind of issues that we've kind of touched on, then yes, I mean, that pure and simple is business, supply and demand. From that perspective, you're over there to produce a product, and as a result, relationship building in whatever form it would take, the things we talked about in the previous podcast, or what we're talking about now, is part of that mix, or could be, to whatever extent. Some people may not be exposed to that, or the exposure to it now would be much less. But to your point, if people are aware of it and they're curious about it, or if in a more kind of extreme way they're interested in it, like you said, that it will be found, because it's a part of that. It's a kind of a subculture part of what happens within, Asian business networking. It's a reality of it.
That definitely had to be a bit, like a shock for you as you got to know different people and you started to like encounter these situations, or like see what behaviors or things that people would do. They had to be a little surprising, to say the least, to say it politely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say that everything from, mild, wow, what just happened, to, oh my goodness. I mean, that kind of just says it all. People can read into it, whatever that would be.
A wide level of
Yeah. 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 And I think that there is a genuine and a general acceptance, from the standpoint of business, that this is part, or can be part, of what you do. it's potentially connected to the business dealing process of making the engine of industry or economics from the standpoint of what product or service that you're producing. It's a part of it. Some people would potentially react to that and say, well, that's just horrible. It shouldn't be that way. Excuse me. There's a certain, moral repulsion that some people may have to that. But I guess to a certain extent, that's a denial that it exists, that in one sense protects it, and in another, exposes it for what it is. So I guess there's a certain brutal honesty that has to be, you have to accept that this is part of how business can be done. Not that it has to be done that way, but it's part of it, and it's part of the experience. It's more of the human kind of experience that we talked about before, about making deeper relationships with somebody in another culture. It's like anything else. Culture is going to have similar qualities. It's going to have that, that human personal interrelationship element. It's going to have what it means to some people to make you feel like you're having a good time. And the more they get to know you, just like in any relationship, the more they're going to kind of get to know what you like or don't like.
Exactly. The more you know someone, the more you can anticipate or, expect. I know in a better way how to impress someone, how to make them happy, how to, to show that I know them and have their best interests, or whatever you want to call it. And in business, like you said, it's the same way. They get to know you better. They get to know your tendencies, and it helps them do business, and it helps them negotiate better. Like you said, the agenda, it's all kind of down to the agenda.
Or an advantage, or give you an advantage in negotiation process. Yeah. Whether you would consider that to be borderline blackmail is up for debate. But I don't think anybody with any kind of level of intelligence is going to, dismiss the idea that yes, it's used for that, or at least to get an advantage or to create a connection where, a better agreement, or a more balanced agreement can be created. That sounds kind of wild, but it's a reality. It's a reality and part of that whole intercommunication process of doing business and making it work.
Yeah. And as having done a lot of business, business is all about strategy. It's all about strategy and how to get the best deal you can and reap the greatest amount of reward for the work you do.
Correct.
So, and I think in that context, for some people, and depending on who you are, more and more options are on the table to use for that.
That's correct. And some of those, can be, as we've been kind of talking about, some of them can be what a lot of people would be considered kind of a much more intimate type of thing, where maybe some aspects of a person's personality, or group personality would be exposed in a way that they wouldn't be otherwise. Different political scandals or, sex scandals or things like that, where, people will be accused of being human, whether people would think they made a mistake or not. That type of interplay, human interplay, is a part of that negotiation process. And again, I think any savvy business person is going to recognize that it could be considered an opportunity, as you said, create a better deal. There may have been.
And that had to be an interesting, environment for you as you kind of experienced that. And then also and I know we don't need to go into too much detail, but especially the different characters, and not necessarily the people you dealt with directly, but the people that they were connected with or you dealt with indirectly. Yeah. Some of those people, as you mentioned in the past, could be quite, a little more on the wild side or a little more very blunt.
Very much so. And then it kind of depend on the person, the level of relationship you had. But, some of them were very open about it. There's a couple of stories that I'll share. One of them has more to do with alcohol than anything. I remember kind of developing a friendship, or acquaintance-related friendship with one of the suppliers. And what he liked to do was, go to some, corner in Taiwan, where there's a bunch of his friends just hanging around. They were hanging out around oil drum that had a fire in it, and just getting absolutely shit-faced. That's what he liked to do. And at that particular time, I enjoyed it to a certain extent as well. So I think that particular evening, we're all lucky to get back to the hotel alive. Because, unlike, a lot of the laws, and rightfully so, for, driving intoxicated, in the United States, don't exist the same way over there.
They do now, like, some countries, they're actually very severe. But yeah, this was when you were there, so, things changed.
The more rural you were in either Taiwan or China, it's just not the same. And that was as early as the mid 2000s. Made my last kind of trips over there. So that's one example that when you did that with him, this particular person, it was a type of bonding that every time I would go over there, he would invite me to do this. And it kind of became a connection for us, that when we weren't in that situation, he felt more comfortable because I could let my hair down, so to speak. And I guess in a certain sense, it's a vulnerability on both sides. I can work with this person. I can trust them potentially a little bit more and maybe be more liberal in my negotiation because this guy has a good time with me, or this person has a good time with me, and they like to do the things that I like to do. Sit around the oil drum with a fire in it and just, going on and, trying to do their best to translate into English when they were slurring their words in Taiwanese or Mandarin. So,
now that definitely that definitely change the dynamic a bit. Like when you just negotiate, but if you actually spend time together, and that goes back to what we discussed in the last episode about personal relationships, it kind of gives you more like you get to know them better. You can feel more at ease. It's still business, but you're more at ease. You're like I don't know this person. No, I know this person. We have a lot in common, so that definitely can take the tension out and ease things a little.
Oh, you have a connection. And getting drunk to that extent creates, it creates a vulnerability, where this person's willing to do this. And as a result, we all know the effects of, extreme effects of alcohol to one extent or another, but, it's kind of a true serum. Some people would even argue that there's a certain more reptilian quality that comes out, in that situation that's not necessarily governed by, your surface level cortex of your brain. And again, it lends itself to a connection, a different kind of connection. But I think it's also important to note here that there have been times where it's like, I didn't want to do that. And I didn't do that, but was still able, to conduct business in an appropriate way. I'm not saying that you have to do this or this particular type of behavior in order to be successful as a business person. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it is an avenue which can create a similar situation as a number of other different avenues could. It was just my experience with some people that I got close to over there.
It kind of goes to what level are you willing to go to? And just by saying that, sometimes by doing a little more than you think you can do, or even maybe think I should do, it can really open some doors to an extent. But it's all based on what personally you can do. Of course, at every situation you can't go all out exactly like the other person does. It's just not appropriate, or not. I shouldn't say ethical, but just not reasonable to do so. But in some cases like that did give you that opportunity, and nothing bad came of it, and it actually did create more of a bond.
Yeah, but there's also the other side of that if the person that you're developing that relationship with doesn't have the same kind of desire to share in that more authentic way, then you can be taken advantage of pretty severely. So discretion going into those situations should be based on more of a kind of a mutual respect, and maybe taking in steps as opposed to just jumping right in. I've seen some people jump right in, and they were taken advantage of in ways that they didn't have to, but because of their own kind of sense of what they wanted to do, whether it was total immersion from a no holds bar perspective, or maybe more graduated, that can happen as well. So people need to be aware, to use common sense as much as possible. Common sense becomes a little more difficult when you're extremely inebriated, but
sure. I mean, so many things become difficult when you're inebriated. Let's face it.
Developing that relationship is the key to it. You get to the point where you can let your hair down with something like that in a more authentic situation, at least as much as you can determine, is probably a heck of a lot more advisable and wise, than just jumping in with both your feet, because they don't really know you. Then you're going to be, quote, that guy. You know what I mean? Oh, when he comes over here, he gets shit-faced every night.
It's all, and they say, all things in moderation, and you need to know how to conduct yourself so you don't, become, like you said, become that guy, and they have like a more of a negative, opinion of you because of your behavior.
Correct. That's right. So,
and I'm sure that you encounter people who were like that on both sides, or
I did.
And it's just it's unfortunate, but it happens, as with so many things.
Yeah. So, like with anything, a certain amount of attachment, detachment has to apply to that process as it develops. But it doesn't mean, that kind of maybe more of a, I guess from the standpoint is when you really do get, close to somebody and you would consider them authentically a friend. I mean, those can be pretty wonderfully fun times, even though when you wake up the next day, you feel like shit.
I'm sure. Hangovers, they suck.
Yeah. So I think the point of this whole thing is that, my experience was very much that work hard, play hard type of thing, but I was also much younger. As I started to get older, I think I was in my mid-40s last time I went. It became more difficult to do things to that extreme. Let's just put it that way. But in the early years, there was a lot of what people would generally consider to be really fun times. I don't know if I mentioned on the podcast, but I may have mentioned it to you. There was a place in Taiwan I used to go to on the weekends. Got to know people outside of the business community, other expats, and other Taiwanese folks that were not connected to me business-wise, called the Pig and Whistle. I don't know if it's in Taichung City anymore, but just to go there every weekend and stumble home. I'm surprised I didn't get mugged, on the 3 or 4 blocks from this place back to the hotel. I mean, because you'd go there and it would just be party time. And, just all kinds of, just the alcohol would flow. Let's just put it that way. And you know this because one of the things that when people start getting fired up, it's not just, let's sit here and sip beers, and over a course of 3 or 4 hours, you get inebriated. No, they're about taking shots, and it's gumbe or gumbai. Bottoms up.
Gumbe, bottoms up. Yeah. So, slamming the shots, or the different types of
they bring out
baijiu or other,
bottle of
Thai, etc.
This is the other story I was going to share with you. They bring out a bottle of Johnny Walker Black, and you're not that kind of drinker. I never was really a hard liquor drinker, but you did put that out. As you start doing shots, it's one beer garden. I did that. I said, okay, I'll do it. And they end up carrying me back to the hotel. I don't have any memory after a certain point in that particular experience.
Oh my.
Now, thankfully, I had these people I developed, pretty, strong and authentic relationships with. So they took care of me. But just imagine what someone else could go through if they didn't have that. So it's also
that could have if you hadn't had those relationships with them, that they could have robbed you, they could have just left you. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. But
I could have been missing person list.
But you mentioned that they actually they took care of you and they actually took you back to your hotel.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It didn't go
to work. That had to be quite of a shock and maybe a moment of terror for them when, oh my God, our guest has passed out.
Yeah, because in situations like that, you got some extreme things like alcohol poisoning and stuff like that. But wasn't that way, thankfully, in that situation. But to your point, it was that they took care of me. They made sure that anything happened to me, and the reason was because I established those relationships with them. We could do that. They never did it again because I wouldn't be able to handle it. But that's another dimension of getting to know people in a more social situation, within your business relationships, especially if you spend a lot of time with them in another country. That's their native country. You are a guest. You are quote foreigner. You are the guaylo. But they had enough respect for as a human being, is that they're not gonna let anything bad happen to you as a result of that. They take care of you. And it's even more so when you can spend that social time with them. They have an even more, desire to make sure that you're okay. Which goes back to that whole idea: they want you to be comfortable, want you to be happy, and they want you to enjoy yourself.
No, and I would say from people I met, generally, like if they get to know you, and as long as they're, I'd say their intentions are good and they're generally good people, they will follow that. And of course, there are people like we discussed previously that will not, and sometimes it's hard to avoid that. But good judgment and use good judgment, your own intuition and your gut feeling, and that can help you avoid those.
Common sense, it goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, that's been very interesting discussing that, and I think it does shed some light into more maybe I wouldn't say maybe extreme, as I put it at the beginning, but more of the less visible or more like risque elements that you may encounter in a business environment, in the Far East.
Well, it's controversial.
Yes,
because not so much the partying, alcohol-related part of it. That's, pretty much everyone has some kind of connection to that, even if they've never really gone deep into it themselves. But the controversial elements, in terms of, the club environment there is a difference from, it's as it differs from, say, a strip club in Las Vegas, as an example, where you would take people that you have, business connections with. It's controversial because it connects itself to a country and an environment that doesn't necessarily have the same view as we generally do in the United States. But even in the United States, you want to take a look at say the pornography industry. I mean, it's there. It's huge, a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it's not necessarily something. Well, it's probably more mainstream than it ever has. But this is different. This is kind of the underbelly of what you would experience in a different country with different cultural background, a different history of the interaction between men and women, different perspective on kind of human rights, as an example, and the exploitation of folks that may not be socially or economically in a position to choose anything different. So whether that's the case or not, I think it's important to be honest and direct that it is a part of what happens over there.
No, I mean, that's very, I think you're quite accurate in what you're describing, having experienced a lot of this, but also, like you said, it's, there's definitely things that can lead into the more, I'd say, seedier, more, elements that make up society, and also, and just more, whether it's, legal, illegal, or kind of the gray area, as I mentioned, all that can be identified or, observed for kind of go anywhere in the world. And it just may manifest differently, as you explained, based on culture, beliefs, society, etc., of each individual place.
Yeah, and or the appetites of the businessmen that go there.
Yeah, that would be the biggest thing, because that's going to directly their choices. Yeah, their choices, or that's directly going to impact the venue or what they may expose themselves to or partake in.
That's correct.
So
yeah, correct.
Well, I really appreciate you kind of sharing that and kind of giving us a little more, background into that, or just from your own examples or what specifically you observed. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we, call it for this episode?
No, the only thing I would say is just that, as, more younger or whatever business folks would then, get an opportunity to travel in the Far East. And just be aware of that, be sensitive to it, use good common sense. It's total cliche. Make good choices.
It's true.
Take advantage of building relationships, and if it develops into something, that would be in your, when I say your, third person individual kind of paradigm of what is fun to do. Make sure that's based on an authentic connection and kind of friendship that you're developing with the folks over there. And just be careful not to be taken advantage of.
No, very well spoken, and I completely agree. And I think anyone who listens to this and is in a situation like that, they have to use common sense and their own good judgment. And I think most people do, but everyone's different, and you never know what can happen. So, but I think you've given a good window into just what is out there, what people could experience, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and use some forward thinking, based on people that you're interacting with, whatever level you have a relationship with them. Use forward thinking, and don't place yourself in a situation that's going to be, place your person in harm's way, so to speak.
No, I totally agree, Dad. I totally agree. So, well, Dad, I really appreciate you joining us again tonight and kind of sharing your experiences and categorizing a lot of these different aspects that we've gone into depth to kind of bring out. So, it's been a pleasure. If anyone who's listening tonight, if you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, you can shoot us an email at internationalimmersionpodcast@gmail.com, and then we'll happily look at them and potentially look at ideas which we can later bring out for future content. And as for you, Dad, we'll definitely have you back for more episodes as we go on to more topics involving travel and your own experiences overseas, which are quite interesting. And the more each episode is, more I find more interesting. So, with that, this has been another episode of International Immersion, and we will see you all on the next episode. So everyone out there, stay safe. And let's hope we can get through COVID and then get back out there and traveling again.
Thanks, everybody.